So the first thing we're going to look at are what are the core areas that we need to be thinking about and discussing in preparation for any examinations. The first area is the origins of the world. The word origins simply mean start or beginnings, how the world came into existence. The second thing is stewardship, or the concept of stewardship. The third thing is the environment and what the environment is and what we can do about it. And the final thing is people and their relationship to animals. So we're going to have to look at the range of Christian views for the origins of the world, or how the world was started and created. And the first thing I'd like to say is something about the Bible and the very beginning of how the world came into existence from the Bible's perspective. So the Genesis story, which is a story in the Bible, the first book of the Bible, was written down at least 5,000 years ago. However, it was shared orally, that means spoken, for many thousands of years before that. What we've got to remember is no one was actually there when it all happened at the very beginning of time, writing it down, either in a religious sense or even in a scientific sense. The writers of the Genesis story, whoever wrote it, did not have science in their mind when writing this. Actually, modern science 5,000 years ago didn't exist. The Genesis story, it could be argued, can simply be seen as a poetical retelling of God creating the world, and not absolutely factually correct. I'm not sure whether the Bible, when it was originally written, had the idea of replaying every factual event accurately as it was done, like we do when we think about the world and how it was created today. Finally, it could be argued that the purpose of the Genesis story is actually to show people that God is the one who gives purpose, meaning, and direction to human life, that it's actually not told to be factually correct. It's actually there to present the idea that God gives purpose and meaning and direction to human life, and gives them value as well, and actually not simply there just to tell you that you've got to believe that this is factually correct. It's important to understand these things because that gives us a little bit of context when thinking about when we're discussing this topic. You've got to bear these things in mind. So, there are some people, as you can see, that believe the 6-day story in the book of Genesis is actually factually correct, that a day means 24 hours, that God obviously made them in that particular order. And they believe the earth is 5,000 years old because in the Bible that's how it's recorded, and the earth was made in 6 actual days. This is known as creationism, and this is the belief that the world was created in 6 literal days. They don't accept modern science explanations, or scientific explanations for how the world began or started. They see that the Bible is without error, it's from God, and should be read exactly as it's seen, and interpret it in exactly the same and the way it's written. It's mainly in America that this creationism has really taken on, this literal reading of the book of Genesis and the conflict it has with science. And they believe that the world is only actually 5 or 10,000 years older. It may look older, but it's been made to look older. It actually is only 5 or 10,000 years old. And they get this because they basically add up the figures and dates in the Bible and end up with that figure. And everything they do actually starts with the Bible in the first place and not science. So they read the Bible, and science has to come in line with the Bible, whereas science does science, and if it disputes the Bible, then science, from a scientific perspective, trumps or takes over from anything else. There are those that believe that God made the earth, but his days, or the word days in the story of Genesis, are simply another word for saying millions of years. The word day in the Bible can be interpreted slightly differently. So actually, the question is, when interpreting the Bible, is what does the word day actually mean? Because the Bible was not written, obviously, in English. It was originally written in Hebrew. So, the word day in Hebrew could be interpreted as 1,000 years. This means that the earth could be millions of years old. Therefore, from this perspective, there is not actually conflict with science. The next thing is the belief that some Christians have. And when you see the red SCS, it simply means some Christians say. Some Christians are very happy to accept that the world was made through the Big Bang and evolution. But actually what they accept within that is that God was the one who created the Big Bang. God was the one who started it. And God was the one that actually was involved in the beginning of life. That it has some divine spark to all that life was. So they don't have a problem with evolution. They just believe that God was the one who began it all off. So many Christians, including the Roman Catholic Church, actually accept the idea of evolution as God's chosen method of bringing life into existence, and they have no problem or do not see a conflict with religion and science. So let's now go on to the idea of people and animals. And the fundamental difference between people and animals is that there is this belief within Christianity that people are made in the image of God. And this basically means that they have something of the divine spark within them. In the beginning of the book of Genesis, it talks about God breathing life or breathing into human beings. And again, this analogy or story kind of symbolizes the idea that there is something unique or special about human beings. So that has led some people to suggest that animals don't have souls, and therefore they become less valuable than humans. Now, when we look around us in the world, we know that many people eat animals and have meat with animals. They wear leather shoes, they wear jumpers from animals. But there is still this idea that God created animals, that animals are part of God's creation, so people should look after them because God made them. However, they are not as sacrosanct as human beings are, because this idea that they're not as important as human beings. Now, obviously some people disagree with that, and they would be vegetarians. They don't eat animal products. There are some clearly that wouldn't wear animal clothing. The big people wearing fur today is something that people is not acceptable, or in a society today people don't like the idea of killing an animal for its fur. However, people are quite happy, or a lot of people are happy to eat meat, and that doesn't seem to have a problem. However, people do have a problem with experiments on animals, medical experiments or cosmetic experiments on animals, because they're seen to be treated cruelly and in an unpleasant way, and therefore that would be seen to be wrong. So this idea of animals don't have souls, not everyone really agrees with that, and even within Christianity there are some that says the Bible says thou shalt not kill, and every living thing is part of God's creation, so should be treated accordingly. When it comes to the environment, environmental issues such as pollution, such as atmospheric gas being released or CO2 emissions, and anything that actually anything that affects the environment, because I know currently there is a big environmental push on CO2 emissions within the world we live in. So if you're a religious person, a Christian, how do you respond to environmental issues? Now, it's important to think that obviously Christians believe that God created the world. Whether they believe it was in 6 days or 6 million, over 6 million years, or whether they believe God made it through evolution, they still believe that God created the world for humans to live in. So they feel they have a responsibility to live in the world and care for the world. So Christians aren't really necessarily going to do anything differently to anyone else. They might work for a charity. Now, a particularly a charity that works specifically for the environment is a charity called Greenpeace. And Greenpeace are very proactive in the work they do when it comes to environmental issues. So either CO2 emissions or killing whales or anything that involves the natural world, Greenpeace are there trying to protect it. So they might actually work for something like this. They would hopefully be involved in non-violent action. That means action because Jesus, again, was seen as someone who promoted non-violence. And so they would act in a non-violent way. One of those ways might well be through something like protesting and through joining protests as well. That's a non-violent action. What else could you do? Obviously, there's a problem with cars and emissions, so they might ride their bikes. And obviously, everyone is encouraged to recycle, so they're going to recycle. Now, the only obviously spiritual thing they might do is pray. The Bible doesn't really talk about environmental issues massively. Actually, in the modern world today, because the Bible was quite old, it obviously works. The Bible reads very much like it uses the natural environment for the people that live in it. They didn't have the issues with greenhouse gases. So there was a harmony to the way the people in the Bible lived with nature and respected nature, maybe a bit more so than there is today. Obviously, if damage to the environment hurts people, then Christians will want to do the most loving thing. This idea of love your neighbour as you love yourself. There's also these bracelets that stand for WWJD, what would Jesus do? Very often you want to do the most loving thing. So when it comes to the environment, it's about what is the most loving thing to do for people, which is seen as the golden rule. God made the world. Stewardship, the concept of looking after it. Stewardship is the principle that God created the world and Christians have a responsibility to look after it. Now, some people believe that a really strict form of stewardship is, well, God gave us the world, we can do what we want with it. That's a very kind of uncompassionate way to look at the world, that we can basically use it however we want, we can take from it whatever we want. Now, some Christians might believe that, and therefore they might say, well, it's a gift from God to us, we can do what we want with it. However, most Christians would take caring responsibility to the world, that God has given us the world, but we should look after it and we should preserve it for the future. We shouldn't actually just take what we want for it now. That is a summary, brief summary of all the 4 key areas with specific ideas linked to Christianity and all those subtopics. Just on the people and animals, when it comes to people and animals, this idea that Christians have pets, and we need to think about the roles that animals have in our society: food, pets, zoos, and also work. There are lots of different ways animals are used in our society, and it's good to think about that and to have an opinion about whether we agree or disagree with those different things. So that sums up religion and science and some of the issues that you'll need to think about when it comes to the exam.